the Reconstructionist Radio Podcast Network presents Worldview Media Podcast, where Gordon and Joyce Runyon view popular media through the lens of the biblical five-point covenant model to help believers appreciate and apply principles of exciting narrative and engaging storytelling.
Hey, welcome to the Worldview Media Podcast. I'm your host, Gordon Runyon, and with me is a woman who has never confessed to murder, my wife, Joyce.
Never confessed.
Never confessed. Never been caught.
There you go. It's all good.
We will speak no more along these lines.
Nobody listens anyway. We're all right.
Hey, we're talking about a movie called The Suspicions of Mr. Witcher, a series of British films. And this series of movies is called The Suspicions of Mr. Witcher. We got it on Amazon Prime. You can look it up on YouTube. And I
don't know if it's on YouTube.
Well, I saw a place where they have a link on YouTube where you go to YouTube and find it and it'll send you somewhere else. Like maybe Netflix or something like that.
Interesting.
And we didn't watch all four of these. There are four. I guess it's like a mini-series.
Yeah, the first one is actually based off of a real-life character and situation that happened. Yeah. And then the other three are fictional accounts.
Yeah, so Mr. Witcher was a
real dude.
Inspector in the London police office.
I believe he worked for Scotland Yard.
Scotland Yard.
Yeah.
Is that the same thing as the London police office?
Oh no, was that Scotland?
Scotland Yard isn't in Scotland. You never read Sherlock Holmes?
I only see the movies.
So in this movie, there is a fairly wealthy family that experiences a terrible crime where they wake up in the morning and find out that they're, we would call them a preschooler, 3 or 4, age 3 or 4. Their son was snatched out of his little kid crib and taken off and murdered, and then hid in basically the outhouse, hid in the cesspool. Yeah. And so there's a great outcry. It's a horrific crime. The community's up in arms, and it kind of goes viral in the 19th century version of going viral. And the police feel a great pressure to act quickly and find out who did this. So you have this interaction then between Mr. Witcher, who's the big city inspector. Yeah. And he goes out to this more rural town where they hate everybody from the big city. And
they've already got it figured out. And they, when something like that happens, you're always looking for somebody that's expendable. Oh. Okay, well, you're not really that important, so let's say you did it.
It's easier to say it could be you.
Yeah.
So anyway, there's an old constable there, and if you're going to figure out what kind of character he is, he kind of represents old school ways of doing everything in England.
The good old boy.
Yeah, I guess they're really, from what I'm hearing, not just here, but in other things that I listen to, I guess back in that day, there really was such an attitude that said that if you were of a sufficient higher status in society, then
it afforded you some luxuries.
Yeah, you didn't...
Some privilege.
If you were thought maybe you were guilty of a crime, maybe they didn't investigate you as hard as they would somebody else.
Yeah.
And they'd treat you with kid gloves compared to if you were lower class, they'd trample all over your rights.
And you maybe.
Yeah, and that was a real thing. And that's not a thing that happened like under the cover of darkness, because I feel like we still have that in the United States a little bit, but nobody wants to admit that happens. And when we find out that it does happen, everybody's upset about it.
Yeah.
But that was out in the open, that everybody knew, no, that's just the way it works. The police are going to treat this group a lot better than they treat this group here. And so the constable in the small town kind of represents that idea. And in comes Mr. Witcher, who is more unbiased, and he's all about solving the crime. And
well, he's one looking for evidence. He's looking for actual facts and what he can find as physical evidence and what he can determine. Right. And this is after, they've been at it for a little while. This guy comes in.
Right.
And of course, there's no procedures for handling anything.
Right.
There's no procedures about, okay, this is what we do. We call people in. We talk to them. We take notes. If there's anything at the scene, we take pictures. We do this. Nothing.
No, they didn't do anything. I mean, there was no standardized investigatory procedure. Okay, but he goes there. The reason they choose him to go is because he apparently has a reputation, and he's very highly thought of.
Yeah. He can figure things out.
And he's kind of a mild-mannered, soft-spoken guy. And so he goes and eventually lands on the right person, has some trouble finding the evidence to convict the right person, and there's kind of a twist at the end that we'll talk about in the second segment, I think. But what do you think overall? Just as a movie, what was your thought?
It's an all right movie. I mean, it's not terribly difficult to watch. I mean, it's a bad thing that's happened, but they're not excessive in the violence or in overexposing. I think you do something like that today and you've got blood and gore and
right.
It's just,
it would be a lot more graphic.
It's just done up to another level. I thought the actors were good. It's another period piece, so the scenery and the costuming and stuff like that was really very nice. It's it's not like a superty duperty movie to me.
No.
But it's not a bad movie.
Well, just in terms of if you're interested in the genre of murder mysteries and the hardworking detective who won't stop until he's found the criminal, I mean, this kind of is that. Mm-hmm. And so there is that. It's kind of a slow-moving deal. There are no gunfights or action scenes.
No. But it's not a terribly long movie. So,
right.
Sometimes you have movies like that last for,
right.
You want to kill yourself before it's over.
Right. Well, since we've been doing this podcast, just to pull back the curtain a little bit, for a long time we were sustained in kind of going week to week talking about movies that we had seen, and eventually we went through the library of movies that we were willing to watch again.
Well, there's time involved with that.
Yeah, and there is.
And these are older movies as well.
Right, that's what I'm saying. And so,
it's not that I wouldn't watch the movies we have again.
Well, I'm just saying that we're kind of in a stage now where we find ourselves at some point in the week kind of scrambling to, oh man, we have to watch something. And we don't. Sometimes it takes us a while to find something to watch. And when we do that, we haven't always been pleasantly surprised by what we've,
and there's negotiating that goes on,
right.
What about this one? No, I don't know.
Right.
Well, what about this one? No, I don't want to do that one. So, yeah.
So overall, I think this was probably, it was different than what I was expecting.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I would say it was better, but for what it was fine.
Yeah.
And if we were over at somebody's house and playing on the TV, they wanted to watch the next episode of this show, I think we'd be all right with that.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't want to be part of our sparkling conversation. We can watch this.
We could watch a movie.
So I'd give it about a B.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, okay. So nothing horrible about it. And when we get into the next, well, we might as well talk about it now. We've got some time in this first segment. There were one of the things that fascinated me about it was the fact that this was based on a true story and that the way it all comes to a head and the way it's all completed is apparently real, I think you couldn't write this story fictionally and have it work the way that it did. You'd have everybody kind of calling baloney at the end, and you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And because it just...
Well, it's involved. It's kind of complicated. I was a little surprised by the end result of it. And they didn't really expound on the why.
No, right.
And so I think that would be interesting to see the why of the end, because, this is a bad thing that happened.
Right.
And, but it's a messed up family. Hello, yet again, messed up families everywhere.
Yeah. And so the thing about it was, well, should we just talk about it? I feel like
maybe after
we
the break.
Shouldn't spoil it.
After the break.
Well, okay, but let me just say then, yeah, you're probably right. That's the way we should do it. But let me just say that the way it does end at the last, like I say, I think any author would be in trouble if he just, bam, put that in.
Yeah.
Because it looks very much like... It's incongruous with everything that had happened previously.
Yeah.
There was no setup. There was no hint that this might be the way it works out. I actually think writing, you can get away with a lot of stuff if you set it up.
Yeah.
And let people know, oh, this could be a thing. And it's within the realm of possibility. But there was nothing like that here. And in fact, the turnaround at the end was so unlike what we had seen from the one particular character that it was really pretty shocking. And so I was listening to a lecture on an article or an essay that Tolkien had written about fairy stories.
Yeah.
And one of the components that Tolkien, I think he coined the term for it. He talked about eucatastrophe. Have you heard that?
No.
Okay, well, a catastrophe is just a bad thing happening out of the blue.
Yeah.
Tolkien had this idea of a eucatastrophe.
So it happens to you?
No, it's not Y-O-U. It's E-U.
Not you and I.
Right. It's E-U, and that's like good or noble or pleasant.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So a eucatastrophe is when something unexpected and good and amazingly helpful happens. And he was trying to say, he argues that a eucatastrophe, we really do see these in the way we live our lives, but as soon as you write them into fiction, you get accused of deus ex machina, where you're just, dropping a piano on the head of the bad guy right at the end. And
it's an easy out.
Right. And his definition of a eucatastrophe was really pretty neat. He said a eucatastrophe is a moment of unexpected, unearned grace. And so he really did see it in terms of a overall Christian worldview. The specific instance that was being talked about was like in The Hobbit, where the good guys get rescued by giant eagles just out of nowhere.
Well, not out of nowhere.
Well, really,
Gandalf
just
was
kind
involved.
of out of nowhere. And so the eagles show up at just the right time and save the day, and there's not much setup for that. And so Tolkien
he talked to the thing.
You're talking the Lord of the Rings movie. Where he talked to the little moth guy?
Yeah,
No, that's a different thing.
Oh, you're talking about the Hobbit.
Yeah, the eagles save the Hobbit. I think in the movie they're up in the tree or something.
Well, when you said save the Hobbit, I was thinking Sam. Because they are hobbits.
Well, they are hobbits. Okay, but it doesn't matter.
Sorry.
It was eucatastrophe in both places. And anyway, I thought that was really interesting. So that Tolkien was arguing that if the world you're writing about is a world that is governed the way our world is governed,
Mm-hmm.
by a good and gracious God who
Mm-hmm.
wants good people to triumph over the wicked, then eucatastrophe is valid.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just kind of meditating on that idea and then watched this movie, and I still think you'd have a lot of people freaking out about it and saying, you can't just do your story like that. That's an easy out that fixes everything all at once. And
Well, I didn't know if it really fixed.
well, it fixed a lot of things, and it did bring some measure of justice. It worked out to be not very much, but in terms of figuring out the puzzle and justifying Mr. Witcher and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So my point was, again, that it'd be hard to write that in. You'd have to really set that up beforehand.
Well, and I don't think that's an ending that you just come up with naturally. That's not...
Yeah, well, would a Christian, though?
I don't know.
I
haven't seen much good.
No, that's... You're back on that again.
Just talking.
And you were the one wanting to watch that Kevin Sorbo Christian thing.
And you're the one who is completely against it.
I don't want to watch it.
But the thing is, too, I think we need to look realistically at what's being put out under the Christian label. I know the big new movie out is it I Can Only Imagine?
Oh, yeah.
And everybody's going all crazy talking about it. And I'm just like, I don't know. What are they saying in this? How has it been?
Well, your big beef is when Christian movies are ambiguous and they don't just say either one way or the other.
Yeah.
Either be...
But sometimes they say it, and they say it so poorly.
Yeah, right.
That it's just like, don't say anything.
Right.
Because...
Well, my sense, we haven't seen that movie, but
No.
my sense from looking at it is they're probably more direct and explicit.
So
you might like that better.
Well, I would. With the group that actually does the music, I would hope so.
Yeah.
I would hope so.
All right. Well, that took us far afield. That was just a plotting point for me. I felt like I enjoyed the way it worked out, but
You enjoyed the way it worked out?
Yeah, just because you don't see an ending like that anywhere.
Okay.
But the only way that works is because it really did apparently happen that way.
Yeah. Interesting.
You can get away with stuff telling the truth that you can't get away with just telling a fictional story. Apparently. So anyway, that was pretty cool.
Although there was some storytelling in this here thing.
Well, all right. All right, so we're going to take a break and come back and we'll be all spoilery and talking about thematic stuff.
All right.
See ya.
The Reconstructionist Radio Podcast Network brings to you a complete lineup of podcasts where you will hear practical and tactical theology. Our desire is not simply that you consume our shows, but that you also live out your faith in every area of life. We can talk all day long about these things, but if we fail to put them into practice, then we fail as ambassadors of Jesus Christ, our King. Subscribe now to your favorite Reconstructionist Radio Podcast Network shows, or you can subscribe to the Reconstructionist Radio Master Feed, where all of the content we produce, including the audiobooks and audio articles, will pop up as soon as they are available. And don't forget to visit reconstructionistradio.com to volunteer as a narrator or to partner with this ministry financially. May the Holy Spirit stir you into action for Christ and His kingdom.
And we're back. Worldview Media Podcast. We're talking about the suspicions of Mr. Witcher. Mm-hmm. Is it plural suspicions?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it's the first one. It's the murder at Road Hill House.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's the segment where we talk more in terms of the thematic stuff. Do you have anything on your mind?
Well, I think this is just a real good example of the fallen nature of man.
For real.
The whole deal. The dad, the stepmom who used to be the nanny to the kids while his wife was dying.
Right.
There's just a lot of misappropriate behavior going on and all this stuff.
Misappropriate.
It's just, because the dad's actually having an affair with the nanny who's there to take care of the kids because his wife is dying, and as soon as she's dead, then he marries the nanny.
Yeah.
And so the nanny is then elevated up over the stepchildren, not as a nanny anymore, certainly not the promiscuous nanny, but
she's the
legit wife.
Woman of the house now.
Yep. Yeah. And they're having their own children, and, there's just a lot going on there.
Yeah, I think if in terms of overall worldview, because it is a true story, you almost can't help but have the background of the film is the world that God made, where men do act this way. Mm-hmm. And there was one place, I don't know if you noticed it, but when the master of the house, his son is the one who had been murdered, but his daughter became a suspect and eventually was revealed to have actually done it. And there was one place where he was obviously torn and said as much that he was torn between wanting justice for his son and not wanting to know what his daughter may have done. Yeah. And I think I see that all over, and especially on social media, where you'll see Christians get outraged about this or that, and especially, just dealing with Reconstructionist radio stuff. It's shocking to me how many Christians are more concerned with the way you point out sin than they are with the sin itself.
Sin, yeah.
And they'll really freak out, and it's disheartening to me. Mm-hmm. Another Tolkien phrase, it threatens to take the heart from me. I feel it being sucked out of my chest by this willingness, even on the part of Christians, to really major on the wrong things. There's actual sin happening over here. And then Christians stand up and criticize that and shine a light on it. And now the discussion isn't about the sin, but it's about how the light was shined.
Yeah.
And
you were inconsiderate.
Right.
You didn't care about the
tone
people.
Police jumping out of the woodwork.
Yeah. But that's really a fruit of the church not doing what it should have always been doing.
Yeah. In what way?
Well,
just preaching the right
what's
things.
Sunday morning about? Are you learning scripture? Are you learning what sin is? Are you learning why you sin? Are you learning why it's bad? That there really is actually sin? It's not just, I can live how I want so long as I don't really hurt anybody else.
Right. And are you being taught about a God who actually hates sin?
Well, who's holy?
Yeah.
And no, the answer is no. And so then it's not about sin. It's about, well, you hurt my feelings. You hurt my friends' feelings. Don't you know these people have feelings? Don't you know they have a soul?
Right. And God loves everybody equally. And how come you can't be nice to everybody? Yeah.
And it's like, well, but I have people in my family that are like this. And I'm like, well, why aren't you talking to them?
Right. Well, that's just it.
Well, I do. And I tell them, God loves you. Hello.
Right. That's just it. You've known about these bad things happening for decades. You've refused to say anything about it. And then when somebody does come up with the courage to say something, no, they're the bad guys.
Yeah, because they don't understand. They're just,
They're harsh.
Yeah, it's really ridiculous. But that's a fruit of our churches.
Yeah.
Of not being in the Bible.
Yeah, right. Well, and then... So my point in bringing it up is that I do think you see that sort of thing happening in the movie that we're talking about. Mr. Witcher really goes in unbiased, and his his whole desire is just to find who did the crime and seek justice for that. And you have people who should be on his side. You have the constable, you even have the family of the victim. And now they're warring against him, and they're actually purposely taking steps to deceive him as he's trying to figure out who killed their kid. And it's just kind of, I mean, it's not shocking, but
that still happens
it is
today,
interesting.
I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, but it's, like I said, this guy comes in after the fact. It's probably a couple of weeks after. They're trying to pin it on the nanny.
Right.
And she's not crying enough, so she's got to be bad.
Right.
Because she didn't really care about the kid, or she was the new nanny having the affair with the lord of the house, and the kid woke up, and so now they had to do him in. And this is a detail guy, so he's just looking through what everybody else has looked through, and he's picking up things. Well, this isn't right.
Yeah. Where's
this item? How come I can't find these things? Well, the lady lost them. No, I didn't lose nothing. And it's always trying to blame somebody of a lower level.
Lots of blame shifting.
That, well, this person isn't as important, so it's okay if they get blamed. You can
stick it on them easily.
Because, this isn't a big deal. They just stole a little thing. And so that's still bad. It's not going to be really bad for them. Well, maybe, but... And, it kind of reminds me a little bit about the last movie we watched previously, which was The Inspector Calls, an Inspector. Right. And just how, because I'm someone who has status, I should be able to manipulate the situation to my benefit because I'm important, and somebody else really doesn't matter that much because they're not me.
Yeah, right.
And especially with the little boy that was killed,
Sure. Well, so the big reveal at the end, I feel like we need to talk about it. It's thematic.
All right.
And it's the surprising theme. The teenage daughter that Mr. Witcher winds up suspecting. And the title of the movie comes from a thing where a lawyer says in front of everybody that he has no evidence, he has no witnesses.
Yeah.
The whole case is built on the suspicions of Mr. Witcher, and that's all he had was his suspicions. And so he suspects this teenage girl, and she's very smart, and she's able to deflect him. She doesn't break during interrogation or anything like that.
Yeah.
And so she gets away with it. She's acquitted, and it winds up destroying...
But his key witnesses who had told him other things suddenly come up and they're
lying.
Recanting. Oh, no, I never said anything like that.
Right. So he's got nothing by the time it goes to trial. Literally nothing except the story that he tells to explain
nobody to
it.
Validate, to confirm.
Well, so it winds up ruining his reputation, and the powerful people are mad that he accused the daughter of the powerful family, so he loses his job.
Yeah.
He's in despair. He's becoming drunk and disheveled and all this. And so months afterwards, I guess we were just reading on Wikipedia, months. It was like 5 years later, that this teenage girl had gotten hooked up with some Christian ministry of some kind. She got sent to a
convent or something. Her father sent her away.
Yeah, it wasn't clear exactly what kind of ministry it was. It might have been but it was something where she had to regularly make confession of sin.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it was some kind of Catholic thing. And then, so the big surprise is that she apparently has a crisis of conscience and winds up confessing to the crime that she did, in fact, kill her stepbrother.
Yeah.
And so they reopen the trial, and she winds up being convicted of murder. And so Mr. Witcher's reputation is restored. He was right all along. And the bad guy, the constable, he wasn't a villain. He was just...
He just wasn't very helpful.
He was a sinner who was not helpful and purposely withholding evidence. And
he disregarded it, and by the time it was brought to light that this really could be an important item, it was too late.
It was too late. Couldn't find it again. Yeah. So he winds up having to confess publicly that he did the wrong things and huge mistakes in the investigation and all that. Probably could have ruined his career. At minimum, could have ruined his career. I didn't know if he was liable to criminal charges for some of that, where he withheld information from the investigator. So, I don't know.
I don't know what rules they had back then.
No. It seemed like they were kind of making them up as they went along.
Yeah.
But I guess my whole thing is, you really have to set that up in a story if you're going to write that in. You know, it just seems so weird to have this girl out of the blue, just have this crisis of conscience, like I say, and come forward.
Well, even in that confession, we don't really know exactly what she confessed to, or if there was an accomplice with her, which is highly likely, probable.
Yeah.
And of course, the clergyman says, "I can't give you this information because that's classified, privy stuff. I can't divulge this to you because then who's going to tell me anything?" And the girl does actually do some sort of written statement, but it's probably just very frank and no details. And this is what happened.
Right. Well, what I kind of wanted to point out is, I'll make a confession. My own confession here is that I listen to this podcast called Cold Case Files.
Yeah.
And it's not graphic or anything, but it's like Bill Curtis, the famous news anchor and stuff. They do this podcast called Cold Case Files where they just talk about, well, that's what it is. It's murder cases that have gone cold, and something happens and somebody figures out who did it and they bring the guy to justice a long time later. Mm-hmm. And just the pattern that I noticed is, before DNA testing, about the only way a cold case was ever solved is when the murderer confessed it.
Yeah.
Either to a jail inmate,
or they got caught for something else, and they're like, "Well, let me tell you."
And that really, there's no other way, really, that these things were ever solved. And I just think it's an amazing gift. It's kind of an amazing grace of God that DNA testing is now a thing, and these cold cases, I'm snapping my fingers now, they're just getting solved left and right as they take this blood evidence that's been stored away in a storehouse for decades and submit it for testing, and somebody comes up and there was no way to find them before, and now killers are being brought to justice decades later.
In the garden, when their blood cried out for justice.
Right, their blood cries out. Yeah. That was a little after the garden, but in that ballpark. Yeah. And so it just started me thinking about, I think that DNA testing 100 years from now, people will kind of look back on it as like the criminologist equivalent of the invention of the printing press. I mean, it just seems like so much stuff is being solved that would have never been solved before. Mm-hmm. The idea that the Sherlock Holmes kind of detective is going to find the thread on the doorknob in the wrong place, and that's going to unlock the whole mystery. That never actually happens. It's either by confession or by the DNA evidence. That's how you solve these cold cases, or cases without witnesses who can be helpful and all that. And so it was really interesting, and that's kind of what this reminded me of, that it's kind of a neat thing to realize we have. It's harder for criminals to get away, So kind of a grace of God in that. All right, you got anything else on this?
Well, so you would think that this girl would be punished.
She should hang.
You would think so. But
she does not hang. What happens to her?
there's some sort of public outcry.
Because she's from a powerful family?
Well, they don't say. They don't say if it's because she's had some type of conversion or there's like all this dirt about her family and how messed up they are. And even the detective tells the father, ultimately, this is on you. You know, this whole thing is on you because you didn't do what was right. And, I think it's true. Yeah. I think it's true.
His own sins kind of came home to roost.
Yeah. So I guess she was prisoned for 20 years, which is still a good chunk of time.
Yeah.
And then she was released, and then she goes to live with her brother.
Who everybody suspected she may have been trying to protect.
Probably had a hand in killing the stepbrother.
Right. That was the
in
suspicion.
Australia, which is a prison colony, just by the way, and she lives until she's 100 years old.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. That means, wow, she got out of prison before she was, 50, 40?
Probably. Well, you didn't used to live so long back in the day. Maybe going to Australia was the thing to do.
Right.
But, it unexpected ending. And I don't know what the public outcry was that...
No, they weren't specific about that.
No. So, it was a bit surprising because I thought, well, here we go. She's going to be a goner. And, the dad's going to have 2 kids that are no more and one more that probably should have been.
Right.
So...
Yeah, that was an interesting part of the story that was not explored. Well, so we don't have that at all, do we? Where the society can be swayed to either one way or the other, want to be too harsh or too lenient. It just kind of cries out for the law of God to be the standard. How are you going to judge apart from the law of God?
Yeah.
Is 20 years enough for murder? Well, what if you confessed it? And, no. And then how do you know? If you're not going to govern by the law, then you're governing by somebody's standard of right and wrong.
Somebody's morality or somebody else's feelings.
Yeah.
So.
All right. So to the law and to the testimony, y'all.
There you go. Hey, you didn't do it.
Oh, this is. And we're not going to go through this fiasco again.
What fiasco?
Where I'm trying to do this cool thing at the end, and you just interrupt it, being all laughy and stuff. Look at you.
I'm the one reminding you. You're going crazy. You're going off, man. Calm down.
Reconstructionist Radio Podcast Network, your one-stop shop for all your audio dominionizing needs.
Well, I feel complete.
Got it done. Got it done. Until next time, y'all, go out and dominionize. Amen.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Worldview Media Podcast. Please visit reconstructionistradio.com to check out the other podcasts in our network and to download our free audiobooks.